NATO scrambles jets as Russia launches more than 500 drones and missiles at Ukraine. They are talking about Poland being on high alert about Russia's attacks. We have Russia continuing its campaign. There has been no letting up. And these attacks, according to Western mainstream media, are actually becoming more frequent following diplomatic meetings in an attempt to frame Russia as aggressors and as being aggressive during this time of U.S.-Russia talks, or at least what is left of them after what seems to be a bit of a stall. Your assessment of where we exactly are and what Russia is actually doing, contrary to Western mainstream media punditry.
Well, I mean, nothing happens in a vacuum. Russia just doesn't wake up one morning and say arbitrarily, let's do this, that, or the other thing. I think what we're seeing in the targeting that's taking place by Russia is a couple things. One, that Russia is serious about bringing it into this conflict on terms that are acceptable to Russia, meaning that Russia and Russia alone will dictate the outcome of this war. Two, how utterly responsible Russia has been in the prosecution of this conflict. We're seeing two categories of targets being hit of late. That and the West is calling this, the escalation. One is Russia's hitting defense industry facilities, and you have to ask yourself, well, why now? I mean, why haven't they been striking them before? See, Russia's goal and objective is not to terminate Ukraine's ability to function as a modern industrial state. And so Russia strikes defense industry facilities that produce capabilities that threaten Russia. And what we've seen lately is that the West has been shifting ballistic missile technology, drone technology from Western sources, in the case of Turkish sources, to Ukrainian soil, and been on the cusp of preparing actual weapons that can be fired against Russia. And Russia has identified these locations and taken them out. And they've done so in a very aggressive fashion. It's Russia's goal and objective to ensure that Ukraine doesn't have the capacity to launch these weapons that in many cases are designed in the West and and are produced using tools and other production means that have been brought into Ukraine by the West. Russia is taking them out. And the other thing is Russia now has decided they are going to be more aggressive in targeting Ukraine's energy infrastructure in response to Ukraine's totally, I can't say, I was going to say irresponsible, but hey, it's war. Ukraine has been targeting Russia's oil refining capability. Clearly, the British have played a very big role in tracking this, and the Ukrainians have been fairly effective in hitting it. And Russia has just said enough is enough. And now Russia is going to come back in a disproportionate response, meaning that Ukraine will now be crippled energy-wise. This was Ukraine's choice. Ukraine opted to escalate to this level, and now Ukraine will pay a price. But this is what we're seeing here, together with Russia's ongoing targeting of Western munitions that make their way into Ukraine, aircraft, anti-air capabilities, etc. But we are seeing an escalation in the air campaign. And then on the ground, it's just, again, Russian dominance all over. I think the other guys can talk to that just as well as I can.
It's very simple, really. I just have a magnificently powerful tool. It's called pencil. And there is another technology which is extremely advanced called piece of paper. So even when you make the basic calculation, and again, it's about correlation of forces, it means Europe has no voice here whatsoever. This paper tiger militarily, they're impotent. So, and Ukraine is being destroyed as a state in the sense that military industrial capacity is being wiped out, and as Scott correctly pointed out, the energy also is being wiped out, and Russia can continue with this for as long as it required, because obviously when you talk about mainstream media in the West, Hunter Thompson gave a very good definition of the press and media, in his Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. And I won't use those verbiage here because otherwise we will get banned. But the point is, they create a lot of noise. It's irrelevant. And in terms of, for example, production of geraniums alone, there are other types of the drones, and there are, of course, types of the cruise missiles, all kinds of other kind of weapons. Russia produces 600 geraniums a day, daily. So he can continue to do it as long as it required. And they can do whatever they want, produce a lot of hot air and a lot of noise. It doesn't change the simple realities on the ground. It is the only thing which really shapes everything about it. As I repeat this ad nauseam, Russia will talk to the United States. And there must be talks between Russia and the United States. These are two largest superpowers, and so it's necessary to maintain the world peace, for crying out loud, if we're going as far as that. In terms of Europe, it's absolutely irrelevant. It's an object. It's not a subject of international politics. And there actually the communications between Putin and Trump in Alaska, for example, and what is happening economically, there are separate tracks, if you wish. Special military operation, and Russians probably have blisters on their tongues, repeating the same thing. All aims or political aims will be achieved, including the removal of Zelensky regime, pure economic and other activity. Absolutely, United States and Russia, they're neighbors. We are neighbors, you know that. So it's just literally next to each other, and there are gigantic, resources also in the American part or sector of Arctic, which, is America's ticket out of the. Well, if not, if not the catastrophe completely, but at least instead of crashing, it will be hard landing, but the country will survive and will continue on. Europe is done. It's over.
Well, where we are is Russia's continuing to do what they do, which is to eradicate the enemy. I think part of their denazification plan is the long-term destruction of the military capabilities of Ukraine, both personnel and war material. I've said for a long time, what Russia turned Ukraine into is a NATO garbage compactor. You throw war material in there, you throw tanks and M777s and all the wonder weapons, you throw Ukrainian personnel and or mercenaries in there, and Russia will destroy them. And when the trash compactor is empty, fill it again, and Russia will destroy it again. I think that's what Russia's doing. I think Russia recognizes that there's even a NATO plan for the conclusion of the so-called conclusion of the conflict, at which time whatever's left of Ukrainians' resources, male and or female resources, they'll try to use them for some kind of a dirty war. And I think Russia's plan is to eliminate all of those resources as necessary and to completely break the back of Ukraine, so that at the conclusion of this, the people that are left in Ukraine have no will to fight, and they just want this thing over and to be, to get back to some kind of life. So I don't think Russia has a time limit on this. I don't think they're, ramping up or ramping down. They have targets, they're striking the targets, and they will continue as the NATO trash compactor fills. They'll continue to empty it until there's nothing left for NATO to put in the trash compactor.
Now, I wanted to get to Trump's reaction to all of this.
I'm very disappointed in him. He and I always had a great relationship. I'm very disappointed. Thousands of people are dying. They're not Americans that are dying, but they're Russians and they're Ukrainians, and there's thousands, and it's a war that makes no sense. And it would have never started if I were president, and that's what bothers me even more, because the election was totally rigged, and it's a shame. We'll see what happens, but I'm very disappointed in President Putin. I can say that, and we'll be doing something to help people live. It's not a question of Ukraine. It's help people live.
He will be doing something to help people live. What's your reaction to that? Oh, sorry. Hold on.
Is he going to send 3,200 ARAM missiles to? Because they deliver humanitarian goods, right? These missiles. Helping Ukraine get offensive strike capability so that you level the play. he has no plan. Sanctioning, Scott Besson's talking about sanctioning. He literally has no plan. But I think that's actually part of the plan. And I'll tell you why. Let's look at the IRAM missile, the ERAM, Extended Range Attack Missile, whatever the A stands for. 3,200 of these. I mean, it's a big deal. They announced it. $850 million. The Europeans are paying for it, and they're going to give them to the Ukrainians. The problem is, when you read the small print, first of all, they haven't totally committed to giving them to the Ukrainians. And one of the reasons is the missile doesn't exist. There's a $34 million contract out with one of the primary contractors whose job it is to produce a prototype missile. But that prototype is to be delivered in October of 2025. That's next month. So the prototype doesn't even exist yet. Once you have the prototype, then you have to subject it to a whole bunch of tests and everything. And then once it's approved, and they could fast track it, but it would take some months to do that. Then you go into serial production. But before you can have serial production, you got to get all the other components lined up. It takes time. Got to get contractors cleared for this, production space allocated. They don't even know where they're going to build them yet. There is no production hall, no tools. It's a prototype. And so, according to the news, the maximum production output that's estimated once ERAM goes into production is 1,000 missiles a year. So, working off of what we know, the prototype will be available sometime in October. Let's say they just rush it forward, and then 6 months later, they're able to magically start, going into production. Where are we now? Gosh, we're talking about, April, May, where they can start producing things of 2026. To get 1,000 produced, you'd have to go into full on. You don't go ramp up into full on production, but you'll crank out a couple. But you're literally talking 2030 before 3,200 of these missiles could even be conceivably manufactured. 2030, it's 2025. This is just a joke. It's an absolute disgrace to be out there talking about providing Ukraine with capabilities that everybody knows aren't going to be provided, which tells you that this is just posturing on the part of the president. The president understands that he has a tremendous amount of political pushback. This pushback comes from people like Marco Rubio, his Secretary of State / National Security Advisor, who hates Russia and everything about Russians and is sabotaging the president left, right, everywhere he goes. Scott Besson, longtime Russophobe. The only words he knows when it comes to Russia is tariffs, sanctions. That's it. He doesn't want a compromise. He doesn't want any deal made. Mike Ratcliffe, the CIA director, Russophobe in the extreme. Doesn't like what Tulsi Gabbard's doing exposing Russiagate. Doesn't like Tulsi Gabbard exposing the fact that all the Russian analysts in the CIA are Russophobes. They don't know anything about Russia. They just got their job because they learned to say Vladimir Putin bad. And they went, oh, yeah, you're qualified to do this job. There's the only people that even remotely support what the president's doing is J.D. Vance, the vice president. That's an important ally. Steve Witkoff, but he's an envoy. He's not a policy originator. He's a policy implementer. And Tulsi Gabbard, but she often finds her wings clipped. They just put Aaron Lucas, a longtime Russophobe, CIA operative, in as her deputy. So, he's there to monitor her to make sure she doesn't go too crazy. This is the fact. And the other fact is, I just got back from Russia, and I'll tell you, the Russians understand this. So anybody who's sitting there going, oh, how's Vladimir Putin taking the Trump temper tantrum? Doesn't care. Water off a duck's back. The Russians are fully cognizant of the fact that Donald Trump is carrying this load by himself. The Russians do believe that Trump wants peace. And if given the opportunity, will create, the conditions for peace. But the Russians aren't under any illusion that Donald Trump is able to conceive and implement policy without pushback. There are tremendous forces arrayed against Donald Trump right now. And half the things he does right now is designed to appease the people who have the knives out because he dared meet with Vladimir Putin in Alaska.
It appears Donald Trump wants to get out of Ukraine, regardless of the reasons. But that doesn't seem to be happening, and Trump's frustrations are boiling over. Sometimes it appears that he's powerless. I don't necessarily agree with that, but at the same time, that is how it appears. What is your assessment of Trump's reaction to Russia continuing its campaign?
Scott absolutely correctly pointed this out. First, I applaud him for bringing this Iran thing. Russians laugh at it. And the fact is, Iran is nothing more than some kind of variations on JDAM stuck with their engine there, just to make sure that it is some kind of the missile, which in reality is flying bomb. Essentially, yeah, and Scott correctly pointed out it's not even in the prototype stage. Forget about initial operation capability. But the point, he also is correct. It's classic Trump administration. What Trump does, he gets around people who are ready to kill him around himself. And he calls this a wonderful administration, beautiful. That's what his favorite term. It's a beautiful administration. So, I mean, if he doesn't know what he's doing, what can I say? And Scott absolutely correctly states that Russians are cognizant about this. Fact is, there are memes now going around. Okay, let's be very frank. They are laughing openly about this whole thing. It's about this, forget me not type thing. Which day, I mean, he loves Putin, which day he doesn't. It's complete schizophrenia, essentially, on part of the US administration, and Trump is the culprit. Despite the fact, whatever his intentions are, the real strategist and the real statesman, actually, whatever his intentions are, he finds the team for that. The problem is he is constantly completely dependent on his donors, and he comes completely under the control of the neocons, and you know what? He can wish whatever he wants, but yeah, Russians don't care. So, and as already have been stated, as I constantly repeat, there are blisters on the tongues of Russian officials, from Vladimir Putin to Rybkov to Lavrov to what have you, that special military operation will continue until all objectives are met. Simple as that. And most what we observe here, it's the schizophrenic reaction of the mainstream media, all those pandit class, the fourth estate, so to speak, people who have no clue actually what they are talking about. The only thing they are good at is narrative. And so, yes, Scott correct also that Trump doesn't have real intelligence. There are no real intelligence in intelligence community in the United States and elsewhere regarding Russia, because the only guys they have, they're the Russophobes. It's not even Russophobes. Russophobes are people who are afraid. They have the visceral hatred of Russia. And as the result, what do you expect from them? And they are not qualified to provide a serious professional analysis and forecasting. But I made in my career in the United States in the last second decade already, pointing this out. So, and what can I say? They can say whatever they want. They can introduce whatever they want. It's irrelevant now. That's the whole point. And especially after Beijing and especially after Tianjin, Russians don't care. If United States doesn't get, or Mr. Trump in this particular case, doesn't get his off-ramp, those people he surrounded himself with, they will make sure that United States is completely run into the ground. Because those people, all those CIA director Rubio, the boy is actually Adelson's, caretaker. He's a lawyer. He knows nothing really about real statesmanship and especially international relations. But you know what? Now he is both Secretary of the State and, of course, the National Security Advisor. Trump appointed him. I'm sorry. So what can I say? It is what it is.
A couple of things. Number one, I think the Russians recognize that Donald Trump, for the most part, is speaking internally. That Donald Trump is not making some original statement that he just thought up on himself or on his own about the situation. He is speaking to the internal enemies, the internal factions that are warring against him and that are, constantly nipping at his heels. So the things that Donald Trump says is to deal with internal problems and the instability of the empire that he's dealing with. I also think that the Russians, the answer to how the Russians view this was in China. The Russians have moved on. The Russians are doing the things necessary to strengthen their economic and interest. I also think that they see the United States as an unstable, nuclear-armed adversary that they have to manage. I think they understand that the The EU is facing catastrophic economic problems and will likely soon fall into some kind of a revolutionary uprising. But that the United States is, though it's unstable politically, it's certainly more stable than the European Union in the long run. And so they're going to have to manage unstable adversaries as they move forward into the new world with the Indias and the Chinas and the global South that's on the rise. So, whenever I hear this stuff from Trump, my reaction is always this: I don't really care what Trump says. I watch the actions that he takes next, because he's just talking to the people around him and dealing with those internal issues.
There's all this talk about a buildup for Ukraine, and that this will be more potent than any security guarantee, as I'm sure you've been following, especially Europe, talking about how important it is to have security guarantees that are completely antithetical to everything Russia has said. But nonetheless, this is what the New York Times is saying, that Ukraine is pursuing a multi-billion-dollar arms buildup that would be funded by Europe as the best chance of ensuring long-term survival. Scott, what is this all about? Is this even possible? And what do you make of what the impact of this new trajectory? Europe keeps talking about how Russia is not really for peace as it ramps up these attacks and continues its campaign, but here they're talking about continuing to militarize Ukraine.
Well, first of all, let's just make it very clear. This is fantasy. The reality is that Russia will not accept conflict termination terms that don't involve demilitarization. Demilitarization means just that. It's the significant reduction in the size of Ukraine's NATO trained and equipped army, to take NATO out of it, and there will be no defense. There will be no meaningful defense industry left. It won't be allowed to exist. This is why Russia has said there won't be a ceasefire. That the conflict ends when the conflict ends on terms that address the root causes of this war. And the West doesn't seem to want to accept that reality, so Russia just continues on its path. We saw Ursula von der Leyen speak the other day about Ukraine becoming the military forge of Europe, and she spoke about Ukraine's military being actually the first European army, meaning that we train these people, we equip these people. This is our army, and we have to use it wisely. And together with that, what Ukraine is saying is, they recognize the political reality that no matter how much tough talk there is in Europe about deploying troops to Ukraine, there won't be European troops and organized military formations on Ukrainian soil for a number of reasons. First and foremost, again, Russia won't allow it. But the other one is that they just can't deploy them. So what Ukraine is saying is, rather than give up on us, just give us the ability to build long-range strike weapons, so that once we get this ceasefire and we have a frozen conflict, and we can begin building our factories and we'll produce this. This is just Ukraine's. This is a British-driven plan called Keep Ukraine in the Fight. It's something British MI6, together with the Foreign Office, have been pursuing since 2023. The disastrous Ukrainian summer counteroffensive. The goal is to make sure that the West doesn't abandon Ukraine. And so what you need to do is create the perception that Ukraine is staying in the fight. And by talking about building these, the ability to have their own missile production, everything. Remember, they're not talking about having it now. They can't. Russia's blowing them all up. They're talking about having it once the war stops. That's how it becomes part of their security guarantees. Well, as I just said, they try and put these things in place right now. They get blown up. Russia's not going to allow any of this stuff to exist on Ukrainian soil. None of it. Zero. And when the war ends, it'll end when Russia says the war is over. So this is just European fantasy, Ukrainian fantasy. And tragically, what it does is it keeps this war going longer than it should be. 1.7 million dead or missing. That's a real number, not a fake number. If you look at it closely, 625,000 as of July of this year, dead, missing. That's, I'm just a simple Marine. I don't claim to be the greatest mathematician, but gosh, that comes up to around 90,000 a month. And things are just getting worse for the Ukrainians. So we're going to be talking about 100, 110,000 a month by year's end. All right. That's dead, or missing, meaning you're never going to find them again. This war cannot be won, cannot be sustained. That's, I guess, the only good news with these casualties is there's no way in hell that Ukraine will be able to continue this fight for much longer. But the bad news is the West just seems to be more than happy to let these Ukrainians die. Again, these aren't trivial numbers. 90,000 right now a month. 90,000. And if this war continues, 100, 110,000. And if you think the Russians are taking similar casualties, you're smoking some strong stuff, man, because the Russian casualties are dropping as low as they go. I mean, Russia is again, this is a high intensity conflict. I mean, Russia's losing 176, 200, 215 dead, a week maybe. I mean, this is war. This ain't a joke. This is war. But the casualties Russia is suffering, while high, are easily replaceable. Russia is not only replacing them, but is putting in reserves that will come into play when Russia wants them to come into play. This war is so lopsided, it's not even funny right now. The Ukrainians don't get to rotate their troops in. You know what a troop rotation is from Ukraine? Being pulled out of a quiet zone of the war, being sent into the heavy part. That's your rotation. No rest. And as you're moving, you're getting hit. You get hit before you go in. Then once you get in, you got to retreat and you die. So they're just moving and dying. You know what Russians do? They go in, they fight for a couple of days, and then they get pulled out. Rest, refit, while other guys come in, fresh troops, highly trained, well-equipped, motivated. Boom. And the Russians just keep rotating them in and out. The Russians are fresh. The Ukrainians are exhausted. This war is over.
How this is going to happen, despite what Scott is saying, that this is a fantasy, they're still trying. So the plan is to buy weapons from the United States. Trump seems happy with this as like a wash hands. I'm not doing anything, but Europeans can buy whatever they do with it. They do with it. But at the same time, what's your reaction to this overall plan that Trump just Scott just reacted to?
Well, Scott said it pretty much all. I mean, there's nothing real behind it. And when British plan anything military due to their pathetic level of their military education and military experience, they kill a lot of Ukrainians. Okay, they kill a lot of people, but yeah, this is not serious military. Their military educational institutions are a joke. Be them this vocational school from Sandhurst to whatever the King's College they teach there, or their so-called general staff college they have there. It's all a joke. It's a low level for pardon my French, for retards primarily. As a result, they do not have even understanding what the modern war is, or for that matter, what the old war is and how the casualties actually relate. It's obviously modeling after Lanchester Ossipov, and when you look at the combat effectiveness, Scott is absolutely correct. And what can I say? I mean, they can dream whatever they want. Those are bad dreams of the empire, which is nothing more than a little stinky island, which fast approaching the third world levels standard of living. So, I mean, let them plan. The problem is that United States cannot provide anything anymore. I mean, it can provide maybe one third if they want. Russians will be happy to see it there because it's a good payout for the guys who will destroy it. So there is not a single weapon system in the NATO arsenal which can change anything on the tactical level. Forget about operational or strategic. And as a result, we have what we have, which is a catastrophe, and what many people also do not remember. This 1.7 millions, multiply them by 2 at least. You know what? That will be maimed, disabled, and all kinds of people who have been wounded, and some of PTSD, most likely, especially when you consider the intensity of this conflict. So that's what 1.7 plus 3.4, 5.1 million casualties. So, and this begins to affect, well, it already affecting profoundly whatever is left of Ukrainian society. And in terms of they can dream like this, they created this flamingo, the ugly, gigantic flying something which they try to sell to all those cretins in Brussels and elsewhere, that it is some kind of valid weapon. Look at the effectiveness of Russian air defense, which only was growing, and this is so. If they think that this can make any difference, I have a bridge to sell. Prepayment. I will provide the account numbers later. So yeah, cash only. So and that's what is happening. But they wanted to do it to the last Ukrainian. Sure, Russians will accommodate them because, well, Russian people in general, and as you can see yourself from the latest polls, more than 80% support Vladimir Putin's policies. They understand what they're dealing with. And this is not against between Russia and Ukraine. This is between Russia and NATO. It's everybody understands this. So what can I say? It's over. But those Moros can still will manage to kill more people on Ukrainian side primarily. So, but if Ukrainians want to do it, let them do it. So what can I say?
So they're talking about massively rearming Ukraine. What do you mean by Ukraine? What do you if they could, which they couldn't? Who would man these weapons that they're bringing in? Ghosts? Because that's the only thing that's going to be left of the Ukrainian military. Let's not forget, a year or so ago, the Germans said they're going to rearm and they're going to come up with $800 million. Von der Leyen, remember this? $800 billion. All of these kind of numbers we were hearing a year ago from Germany and from the EU and etc. And now a year later, they don't have a dime. The average German can barely afford a beer and a schnitzel. The French and the Brits are on the verge of an absolute cataclysmic economic collapse. So the idea that countries that are flat broke are going to somehow rearm Ukraine, and they're going to send in a bunch of arms that will have to be manned by dead soldiers because they're all getting wiped out, doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I guess I'm going to come up with a fleet of Rolls Royces also. That's it. I'll come up with a fleet of Rolls Royces, and they'll come up with a total, rearmament plan for Ukraine. And add this: what are the issues that they have? Number one, Ukraine's running out of people. Ukraine's been saying for a while, we're short of people. Number two, the military-industrial complex in the West is unable to produce weapons. So an industrial complex that can't produce weapons is going to produce them somehow magically and send them to a military that's out of people. And oh, by the way, the people that are producing these weapons are broke and have no energy to run their factories. The whole thing is a twisted, sick fantasy that you have to be absolutely ignorant of everything that's going on to read an article like that and think that there's any truth to it, and that it's anything other than neocon propaganda.